The Russian war economy now resembles an engine running low on oil. The engine still moves, but its gears, they grind harder as lubrication disappears. Oil lets each moving part work without damaging the next. But money operates the same way. It keeps the factories paying suppliers, suppliers paying the workers, and repair crews getting parts. But when the money stops moving, one failure begins to starve the next. It begins to grind against it to make it impossible to work. But Ukraine is striking while this internal grinding is already underway. New damage arrives before the old damage can get repaired. Emergency stockpiles, built over decades, today are becoming exhausted. At this point, the Russian economy is not just suffering, it's beginning to show signs of implosion. It's not a question as if there will be a complete collapse, because today, total structural collapse is now completely unavoidable. My name is Dr. Jason Smart. I'm a Kiev Post special correspondent and a national security advisor. The grinding we see in Russia starts when borrowed money stops returning to the banks. And today, 1 in 4 major company loans have gone unpaid. Banks, they counted on that money. They need that money to lend out to others. Moscow, cognizant of what a disaster this is, has poured $88 billion into banks in order to replace part of that missing money. But even afterward, the factories struggle to fund what they need, to buy the steel, to get the parts, to supply the fuel, and to pay the wages. So the shortage, it moves from the banks into production. The factories, short of money, start pushing that shortage onto suppliers. Today, they owe suppliers about $54 billion, while unpaid bills, they've grown 9 times faster. It's amazing to think that the factories preserve cash by making suppliers wait for payment. But that means something else. It trickles down. It passes the buck. A steel producer, it delivers metal but waits for months to get paid. It still pays workers and buys raw materials. But eventually, the supplier runs short and cuts production. That means the tank factory then loses the steel that it needs. That same squeeze is now affecting other Russian companies. And when you look across the Russian system, you realize it's not limited to steel or to the tanks. It's the entire system that is breaking. And as it breaks, it is something that will eventually break the Putin war machine. And that will be the end of the Putin regime. I let's get to the world the truth of what's really going on right now. As you know, we started this channel 15 months ago here in Ukraine to get the truth of the world, what's really happening inside of Russia. And as you know, I wrote my doctoral dissertation about the Putin regime and how it operates. It's also a topic for my master's thesis. And I am telling you, there has never been a time where the Putin regime is as weak as it is now. Help others to know that now is the time to support Ukraine to defeat Russia. All I ask from you is this. Please subscribe right now. Please make sure to like this video, hype this video. Leave your comments below what you think is going to happen. And consider becoming a channel member. So it's amazing when you look at the data from Russia, because it really is terrible. And there's so many data points you can cite, so many statistics you could use. The fact that first-time missed loan payments, they jumped 40% this year. Bankruptcies, they've tripled amongst businesses. That means the factories are closing, businesses are going out. And across Russia, we see the government suffers as a result of that. So that's both the private and the public sector. More than 70 regions now spend more than they collect. There's only 85 regions in Russia. 70 of them are in the red. Their emergency savings, well, they fell to $13 billion. Local debt, it has more than tripled. Major industrial towns lost more than 33% of their taxable income. All these things interplay. The fact that the businesses are suffering, well, that means the government has less money. The fact the government has less money, well, that means that the government banks, the central bank, has less money to loan to the private sector. And ultimately, their problems become interconnected. We've seen just in 6 months that Moscow spent $75 billion more than it collected. It also borrowed its entire planned yearly amounts in just 6 months. This is while oil and gas revenues, the taxable income that's supposed to come from them, it fell by more than 17%. So time and again, we are watching as there is simply not enough liquidity. There's not enough cash to keep everything going. Now, consider Russia, a country that started a war against Ukraine, thinking that it would get away with it, that sanctions wouldn't affect it. But the United States has just passed more sanctions, and how they apply them will be key to this. Because if sanctions are targeted at the right industries, if it's used the correct way to make sure that those who buy Russian oil and gas pay a high premium for them, that will discourage a lot of buyers. And those buyers not buying Russian oil, that will choke the Putin war machine. But consider also the key parts of Russia's economy, the parts that it cannot live without. Look at things like the Russian railways. Russian railways, they send $69 of every rebuilding $100 into interest payments. So already, incredibly enough, the railroads that cover Russia, that are so necessary, vital for its national interest, they have $52 billion of debt, and $69 out of every 100, it goes just to pay old debts. That means that the amount of money that they're supposed to spend on things like new trains or fixing the routes, well, today it's down 44% from what they just spent in 2024 alone. That's a huge dive. But for a critical industry like that in Russia, if you don't finance it, if you don't take care of it, it'll just get worse. The Russian railways, they need all the help they can get. The winters are cold in Russia. There's always more repair work to do. But more than that, there's the ongoing problem of those pesky folks out in the world destroying the Russian railways. We see groups like Atesh setting fire to the relay boxes. We see rail lines being cut. And all this is being done for one purpose, to break the war machine. But breaking the war machine, it comes at an inconvenient moment. A moment when right now there's only the option of using rail. Fuel in Russia, it's hard to come by. Time and again, we've seen regions across Russia simply are out of what they need. They do not have gasoline. So, how do you operate your city or your country when you don't have gasoline, you don't have diesel, and you only have railways? And those railways, they're out of money. Well, that does complicate it, but not as much, though, as Ukraine's drones striking the factories, striking the refineries, hitting the railways is changing the way that Russia operates. Ukraine, it's been able to attack across Russia, and that means that Russia spreads out its air defense. That air defense is highly concentrated in Moscow and around Vladimir Putin's private homes. Well, today, it is not able to also defend things like the critical infrastructure. And without that infrastructure, it makes it impossible for the Russian state to continue operating, but also makes it impossible to operate a war of aggression. But Ukraine's strategy, it goes further than that. And where I think a lot of people miss how clever the strategy really is they don't think about the secondary, the tertiary effects of what all this means. By itself, it makes sense, perfect sense, to strike the logistics, to hit the wild berries, to hit the railways. But even more than that, consider what striking the wild berries is. Wild berries, they owe hundreds of millions of dollars right now to VTB Bank. It's one of the biggest banks in Russia. So when they're not getting their money back, well, that means that VTB Bank, it suffers. It can't give out more loans. Without giving out more loans, it doesn't make more money. Without making more money, everything gets more difficult. And that affects businesses across Russia. Businesses that are increasingly in the red. Just in the wild berries scenario alone, we've seen now hundreds of companies that are dependent on wild berries today saying that they're probably going to file for bankruptcy. That means they will not be paying back those loans. That means that the banks who they took out the loans from will have yet another red mark in their ledger. But let's also consider what this means for a government. In early July, refinery processing, it fell by 26%. That was removing about 1.4 million barrels of daily processing. But less fuel is produced. Well, that means that there's going to be more problems. More problems for not just that industry. They, of course, suffer, and it's important. But more important, think how people around Russia deal with this. We've seen increasing costs for basic goods, such as food. Why? Well, it's usually brought in from other regions, and that comes on a truck. And trucks, well, how do you run an economy without them? They are central to the marketplace. But today, those trucks are not running. But it also means that trucks for the military are not running. They lack the necessary diesel. So if you're from one of the 56 of Russia's 85 regions that today lacks sufficient fuel, how do you make plans for your future? Now, anyone in business would tell you, you have to be cautious. When you're dealing with a high period of insecurity, instability, uncertainty, you should probably not try to spend your money. Hold off or wait little bit longer. See how things go. But in Russia, how do you plan for the future if you're not sure if or when fuel will ever return? And you know that will affect every other region of Russia. So if that's the case, that you're dealing with a situation like this, a situation of the unknown, facing imminent bankruptcy, why stick it out? Why think that it's going to turn around, that it'll get better sometime soon? All the evidence is the contrary. Ukrainian drones, they continue to strike. Just in the past week, we've seen more strikes across Russia. We've seen more strikes on wall barriers. We've seen more strikes on Russia's defensive capacities. On the Donbas, we see the situation is not improving for the Russians. In fact, Ukrainian drone strikes there have taken out more targets now than they have in months. Ukraine is having a field day, and the Russians are being repelled. Now, as all of this is happening, it gets yet even more complicated, which reminds me, check out in the first pinned comment. There you will see there's a Substack article I wrote on this topic that you can check out that explains it probably better because you can get all the data in one place. But also check out that same post, the link for PayPal. It's helping us raise money for the Ukrainian soldiers to support them, to make sure they come home alive. Thank you for everybody who's checked that out, who's helping them. But overall, before Russia is able to clear the major problems it has with its refineries and the damage, they have another one. And that's that they have to today deal with a sinking hole in their economy, one caused by bad debt that people are not going to repay. In Russia, that number has continued to grow. In fact, it's continued to grow so rapidly that it's breaking records even for Russia. Now, people understand what this means. It means at some point the banks run out of money. When the banks run out of money, then you have the bank runs. But before that happens, if you think that the bank is going to run out of money, the best thing you could do is get your money out of the bank. And people are doing that. In fact, we saw in July there was a record amount taken out of the banks, more than $8 billion. That's a 40% increase from what we saw in June. So that's a pretty stunning statistic when you consider that June, it had been the record month before that. But as a sign that people don't think the government will step in and be able to save them, keep in mind, the government in Q3 of this year is supposed to raise about $9 billion selling its bonds to the Russian banks. The Russian banks, they only purchased about $112 million of that. That's a huge gap. But perhaps, though, even more shocking than that is when you consider what this means for the larger economy. We've seen now that those who are holders of Russian bonds, just last month, about $1 billion worth, they're selling off their Russian government bonds. That's despite the fact that the government prepays those at a rate of more than 16%. Now, those would typically be considered to be excellent conditions. But if you're selling them off early, there's a couple of different reasons why that could be. On one side, it could be because you don't think the government will be around to give your money back once those bonds mature. But the other option is because you yourself simply need the liquidity. Given the fact that banks are typically the buyers of these bonds, that makes things very interesting. But there's another, I discovered, group that is buying a lot of the government's debt, buying the war bonds. And those are the pension funds. Now, what makes it interesting is that the pension funds, they have a high tolerance for this. They plan on holding bonds for a long time. But also, they know that nobody will notice the huge problems in the balance sheets, probably for a few years. People aren't nearly much on top of that as they're on top of what's happening with banks and their balance sheets. But there's a problem. Today, it's becoming increasingly clear the government really might not be able to pay them back. And as there's now a popular fear in Russia that the government will soon begin freezing people's bank accounts, taking from them their dollars and euros in order to pay for this war, a war that Russians no longer believe that they're winning, then you have a real problem. Then you have a real reason to start rebelling because the government, it's taking your money and there's no hope you'll get it back. But as Russian banks are facing this problem, facing uncertain times ahead, the government is trying to help them. The only problem is it's those very banks that the government depends on to bail them out as well. The disaster that Russia faces is circular. One is destroying the other. The private sector and the government, linked for decades hand in hand, are together, sinking to the bottom of the sea. Check this video. You'll see why. As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.